Eamon, if I could come on to you now, I'm listening to Neil and Ashley talking there, and I'm thinking, well, does this all fall on me? I mean, who's there to protect me? Presumably the governments are doing something to protect me, and the companies, or is it all down to me?
You as an individual?
Or me as a symbol of the individual.
Okay, so...
I mean, what are the lawyers doing to protect us, I guess, is what I'm...
Okay, so across the world we've seen a number of different initiatives. Probably, if you're talking about you and me, the most pressing, most interesting thing I think about us would be our data, who we are, where we live, how much we earn, sexual preferences, those sorts of things. And what's happened in Europe over the last 10 to 15, 20 years has been the push for data protection. And data protection regimes have been established in Europe, and they've been running quite successfully, I think, for a while. And they generally require what we call data controllers to ensure that they treat personal data and sensitive personal data in a certain way. And so they can't use it, for example, generally without your consent, or unless it meets with certain other criteria, like it might be necessary for providing you with a service, etc. A lot of those regimes also require that the data controller implements it's never a specific level of security. It won't detail precisely what, but it says that the data controller should take steps to make sure that the data is proportionately secure or appropriately secured, depending on the importance of the data, etc. And so you're talking now about the codifying of where responsibility sits within Europe and America. As an example, well, the US doesn't have the same level of detail on a sort of comprehensive level. There are patches of it throughout different sectors, but Europe is probably the first jurisdiction to try and do this on a grand scale, and it's taking further steps again through the general data protection regulation, which will come into force next year. But both the US and Europe now will have breach notification requirements, and I think this is important. It's something that we don't necessarily have in this part of the world, although it's beginning to evolve, it's beginning to emerge. And a breach notification requirement would be where one of our clients is attacked, either the information is stolen or it's held to ransom, in which case is there an obligation on the data control of the company or the process of the person that they may have outsourced those roles to notify somebody, and is it a data protection commissioner or officer, for example? So in the UAE, for example, we don't have a data protection law yet, although there's rumours that one might be coming into force soon. We don't know when, but we do have, I suppose.
Why is that important? If
it implements the same sort of protections around protection of personal data, around security obligations, around breach notification obligations, it will impose a new framework on businesses here in terms of how they collect data, how they store it, how they process it, how they secure it, and then who they notify in the event of an attack. And onshore UAE, we don't have that regime yet, but in the DIFC and the Abu Dhabi Global Market, they have those regimes, and now in Qatar as well.
And that's because those particular zones are dealing with financial institutions with high volumes of high value data.
Correct, and they transfer a lot of information between, say, here in Europe, where Europe has these strict obligations and standards. Here we don't have it, so I think the compromise has been let's make these pockets of excellence for banks to be, come to be attracted to and set up, so that there won't be any issue with their compliance and how they transfer data between, say, the DIFC back to the UK, as an example. Okay. So without that sort of, in that vacuum though, of obligation to secure data here or to notify anybody, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do it. It would still probably be best practice to think about doing it.
So at the moment, we don't have a lot of time, there's obviously a lot of detail, but there is work underway in the region, particularly in the UAE and Dubai, to develop legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks for data protection.
Yep.
But we're still a bit behind Europe, say. And in the meantime, whilst we don't have that stuff in place, it's basically up to us what we do, or up to our employers what we do for data.
Right, and what we see is, by and large, most people tend to try to make the effort to put in place data security policies or obtain consent from consumers to use data.
Do you find in contractual frameworks that because there isn't a sort of national regulatory environment for data protection. If I'm doing an oil construction contract with Saudi Aramco, for example, the data protection element will be in the contractual framework, so it will be...
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of contract, the nature of it, but yeah, they'll often be, particularly if it's a European company, they will want to adopt what they call the model clauses, so that the people here that might be acting on their behalf behave in a way that wouldn't get them in trouble in Europe.
Right.
So that's sort of raising the bar a little bit in terms of those standards.